if your crew on that boat doesn't have a good culture, it's going to be hard to row there. I want to talk to you about culture. How does culture fit into this? Where do you put it in? At the charter? Do you put it in, as you go? Is it a thing to put in?
It's definitely a thing. Well, it's something that is not something to put into the project culture. I don't think it is, because in organizations, you're going to be interacting with one another, whether or not you're doing project work.
Exactly.
And so culture is something that precedes, to my mind, selecting and working on a project. Culture is about building an environment where everybody can shine, everybody can be their best, everybody can contribute the work that they excel at, and that nobody is diminished in being part of this group of people that work together on the project. And like I said a few minutes ago, I really think that culture needs to extend beyond, needs to extend to include the consumer of the work that we're doing, the customer, if you will. That really needs to be part of it, because I've seen so many rigid barriers between project team and the client. And I've also seen rigid barriers between contractors and subcontractors that ends up getting in the way in organizations and in projects as well. And these artificial structures that we have, whether they are contracting structures or client and customer, or customer and service provider, all of those artificial structures tend to reduce our ability to deeply connect. And being able to deeply connect is an absolutely essential part of an effective culture.
Can I challenge you on something here?
Yes.
I'm not, and that wasn't a question. That was just, I'm going to challenge you on something here.
No,
you know me. We're going to edit this part out. So here's a thought, just a thought. How does culture manifest in the everyday project? And the way I see it, it comes in the really tiniest of things. For example, let's say I'm about to run a meeting. Most of us have had to call a meeting. And there's different ways of running a meeting. There's different ways of facilitating the meeting. And there's different ways and methods of putting an agenda together. And many team meetings don't even have an agenda. Again, coming back to tools, culture, value, tailoring, those little points right there matter to my decision. If I'm going to put an agenda together for a group, here's one process I'm currently using for one of my teams. When you get an invitation from me, in the notes section, you actually get the topical agenda with objective next to each topic and how many minutes we're going to spend on each topic. Now, you go to one of my other team, I have a creative team as well. That does not work for that team. In that team, I have to come up with a very different approach to the agenda. You might still get the invitation from me. That's usually a non-negotiable part of my culture. Is I will send out an invite for our calendars, because I know behaviorally I want to install accountability that we're all going to show up because we've agreed on our calendar. Fine. But in terms of how culture appears there, for brain, what I call for creative sessions where we're spitballing ideas and we're ideating and solutions, I put the problem as the agenda. Like, this is what we are solving for. That's a solution session. Bring all your best ideas. And I don't call it a meeting. If you get an invitation from me, rarely will I put the word meeting into the title of the call. Why? Because meeting is so passive, and part of my culture when it comes to running a project is to activate people into inspired action, not dictated action. So another place where culture impacts us, as an example, is the charter. How the charter is written and what goes into the charter, like putting in the values piece. That's intentional culture. So my my position is that culture happens whether or not you want it to. So we have opportunity to intentionally support and create a project culture.
Right.
And so at every tool that I use, I reflect and go, how am I supporting the specific culture that I would like to foster in this group?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I activate that? And this is where connecting a tool to the culture does matter. And I wanted to throw that your way for some ideas and maybe a story or that you may
Well,
have.
that's there's so much interconnectedness here, and when we dive in, and let's go back to the charter again. Very often, organizations are going to have templates that they use for a charter for different things that they need to build out on the project. And I find that there's two major approaches that are used in organizations to complete a charter. In many organizations, you've got a project template, or most likely because the template is somewhere that people can't find. Let's just use the charter from the last project that we did, and let's change things around to make it fit this new project. But it's often, Bob, go forth and create the new charter for this project, and then bounce it off, throw it over the wall to a bunch of people to look at and review and give their feedback, that sort of thing. And the expectation when you're handed something for review is that it's your job to try to beat it up, to make suggestions for change and flip it back over the wall, that sort of thing. I also know that if you're doing some technical review of documentation, it takes time to get into the zone where you can actually review deeply. Mm-hmm. And you're very rarely given that time to review a document thoroughly. So when it's thrown over the wall and you've got a superficial review of it, you can find spelling and grammar errors, but you're probably not going to find the really deep issues that go along with it. Mm-hmm. So the notion of somebody building a document and throwing it over the wall and reviewing it back and forth and all that stuff is, I think, a very awkward and painful way of producing a charter. I think what you should really do is you think about the table of contents of that charter. That becomes your agenda for a review, for a meeting, for the right people to get together and say, what is the value that we want to deliver, and who are the key players or the stakeholders that need to be involved in this project, and what are our constraints and what are our expectations of the solution space, and talk about it with the key players on the project. The outcome of that then gets persisted in the template. Then the review process is merely, yes, this is exactly what we talked about in the meeting, and we're all in sync with what we have there. And the chartering is at least the first stage of the chartering is complete. And we've got it going there. So it's a cultural thing where I've seen too many organizations where the culture is, here's a template, go fill it in, mm-hmm. Rather than let's agree on what we need to do and persist it in the template. Two very different perspectives.